you. Our topic for this afternoon's recollection is on Saint Vincent de Paul, Controversies, Setbacks, Failures. Our facilitator this afternoon is Father Serafin Peralta, CM. He is from Gubat, Sorsogon. He is known to his confreres and friends as Father Perry. He was ordained a priest of the Congregation of the Mission at the Andres Seminary at Lemont, Illinois, USA, almost 50 years ago, on June 17, 1975. He worked in the academe as rector of then DePaul College in Haro, Iloilo City for 12 years and was the provincial superior of the CM Philippine Province 1992 to 1998 and also director of the Daughters of Charity in the Philippines 2000 to 2006. He was the spiritual advisor of the Ladies of Charity 1998 to 2021. At present, he is the spiritual director at St. Vincent Seminary in Tandangsora, Quezon City. Please join me in welcoming Father Perry.
So here we are. Thank you very much. We're talking about failures and setbacks. Ito, inumpisahan natin ngayon with a failure of technology here. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the controversies and the setbacks and the failures that... Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Hello?
Yes, Father, loud.
You can hear me. Okay, good. In 2018, a year after we had celebrated the 400 years of the Vincentian Charism, I wrote a book with the same title. I don't know if you can read it. It's entitled "The Controversies, Setbacks, and Failures, Saint Vincent de Paul." Most of the feedback that I got was that I was so very negative talking about Vincent's controversies, setbacks, and failures at a time when we were celebrating such an inspiring landmark like the 400 years of Vincentian Charism. But I had believed then, and I do believe now, that we would not have reached the milestone of 400 years of Vincentian Charism had these controversies and failures and setbacks not happened to St. Vincent, and had not St. Vincent been able to address these in his typical way of addressing difficulties, which is humbly acknowledging his condition as a wretched sinner, worse than the devil. Whenever I read about the life of St. Vincent de Paul and reflect on the many controversies, failures, and setbacks that have happened to him during his very colorful 80 years of life here on earth, I am amazed at his strength of character and his profound humility and pure simplicity. And I think that this is the reason why the Vincentian Charism has come this far and is still so alive. We have a lot to learn from St. Vincent and to put into practice in order to ensure that this Vincentian Charism will continue and last till the end of time. One way by which St. Vincent faced controversies, failures, and setbacks was to focus on Christ. First, he always asked himself each time that he was going to make a decision, what would Jesus Christ do if he were in his place at that moment. And also, he lived out this philosophy. And I want you to get this one very well. If you like to live like Christ, you must die like Jesus Christ. And if you want to die like Jesus Christ, you must live like Jesus Christ. So let me repeat that. If you like to live like Jesus Christ, you like to follow him. If you like to live like Jesus Christ, you must die. You are willing to die like Jesus Christ. And if you want to die like Jesus Christ, you must live like Jesus Christ. So these were the two points that St. Vincent focused on in his life, addressing difficulties, controversies, setbacks, and failures. He focused on Christ. And whenever St. Vincent would call himself a wretched sinner, or one who is worse than the devil himself, and whenever he would say that he was just a lowly instrument in the hands of God, left to himself would just mess up everything, I see him as expressing a deep conviction of his unworthiness. This deep conviction of his unworthiness was not born out of a romantic notion of what a sinner is, or simply to adorn his conferences with pious statements and self-debasing words. Rather, he was coming from a dynamic experience of sin and imperfections, of controversies, of setbacks, and of failures. And there's a long list of controversies and setbacks and failures that through the years of St. Vincent's life have included, many things: unpaid debts, unfulfilled contracts, legal battles, failed projects, personal bad habits, delayed projects, confrontations with leaders like Cardinal Mazarin, the Prime Minister at the time of France, disagreements over important issues and heresies advocated by friends like Cornelius Jansen and the Abbot of Saint Cyran. Now, as it is, our time has already been cut short by some technological hitches. I don't know if I will be able to mention all of these, but let me just for a starter, mention 15 of these controversies and failures and setbacks that St. Vincent de Paul experienced in his life. Now, I have enumerated them there: the birth year, little sins of childhood, deaths, ordination, the desire to become a priest, empty promise, higher ambitions, Turkish captivity, that he was accused of stealing, the Salpêtrière project, the Orsini farm, to buy an abbey, a monastery, Cardinal Mazarin, the Abbot of Saint Cyran, and to set the captives free. These are just 15 of the hundreds of controversies and setbacks and failures that St. Vincent de Paul encountered during his colorful 80 years of life here on earth. Let me start with the birth year. We are not sure as to the exact birth year of St. Vincent de Paul. So for many years, the belief has been that Vincent was born on April 24, 1576. This was affirmed by his first biographer, Louis Abeli, and then St. Vincent's tombstone showed these words: died 27 September 1660, aged 85 years. In 1922, a confer by the Pierre Coste came up with a study that showed that the real date of Vincent's birth year was in the year 1581. Father Coste based this on St. Vincent's own pronouncements about his age, because he made many such statements and pronouncements, or more or less 12 times in the course of his life. And all these pronouncements, all these statements show that he was indeed born in 1581. However, since neither Father Coste nor the other historians were sure whether the years spoken of by St. Vincent were completed or not, it is safe to say that 1580 was the real birth year of our saint. 1580. That's why nowadays, when you see St. Vincent's picture, sometimes there is a caption below it, says 1580 to 1660. Okay. So even the birth year was a source of controversy. Second, well, I would like to leave you with that, some guide for reflection. Like, people sometimes don't want to accept their real age. Okay, how about you? Do you accept your real age? What is it about age that many people seem unwilling to accept? Why do you think is that so? So these are just guide for reflection. The second controversy, failure setback, is the little sins of childhood. And this one is from St. Vincent de Paul himself. It is his own story. And he mused sometime later on in life. I remember he said that when I was a lad, my father used to take me to town with him. He was badly dressed and a bit lame, and so I was ashamed to go with him and acknowledge him as my father. Wretched me, how disobedient I was. And on another occasion, he said, in the school where I was studying, they told me that my father, who was a poor peasant, had called to see me. I refused to go out and talk to him, and so I committed a grave sin. Eventually, much later on, Vincent had acknowledged these little sins. Since then, he has been repeating and insisting on his humble family background. So he was ashamed of his father because his father was poorly dressed and his father was actually limping, and he did not want to be associated with that picture of his father. So that's another failure, another setback, another controversy in his life. And with this, I would like to leave you some guide for reflection. How and what has been your relationship with your father? And then, what do you admire most in your father? Third is about debts. Mahilig si St. Vincent mangutang. Like many of us, mahilig siya mangutang. As a young priest, Vincent had already been incurring debts which he had difficulty paying for. The reason probably for these debts was the fact that he was, understandably, he was a self-supporting man while pursuing his studies in theology and canon law. His stipend as a tutor in Toulouse was not enough for his everyday needs. And so this habit of incurring debts persisted even in later years, although not anymore driven by vested personal interests, but motivated by his concerns for the continuation of his many works of charity. Debts were also incurred in order to infuse more capital into his many businesses whose profits he used to support his works for the poor. But the fact is that Vincent de Paul mahilig siya mangutang, at hindi lang yon, mahilig siyang makalimutan ang kanyang mga utang. He refused in many ways to pay his debts. So I will leave you again with guide for reflection. What do you usually do with your money? And how much of your earnings do you save? And have you ever incurred debts? And what did you use them for? Okay. Magandang katanungan yan. Pag-isipan natin mabuti. Pag-nilay-nilayan natin mabuti. Fourth is his ordination. The ordination of Saint Vincent to the priesthood is an episode in his life that was filled with questions and doubts. Vincent was supposed to have been ordained as subdeacon. At that time kasi tatlo yan. Subdeacon, deacon, and then priest. Ngayon, deacon na lang saka priesthood. But he was supposed to be ordained as subdeacon on September 19, 1598, at the age of 17 or 18 years old. And then he was supposed to be a deacon on December 19 of the same year. On September 13, 1599, Vincent was granted permission for priestly ordination, but he decided to delay for another year his ordination to the priesthood. For what reason? We'll try to see. But he was ordained a priest eventually, but not in the diocese where he got permission, which is the Diocese of Dax, but in another diocese, Perigueux. He was ordained priest by an old bishop, 84 years old, Monsignor Bourdais, who died a month later. So Vincent was ordained a priest at a very young age of 18 or 20 years old. But then there was a Council of Trent previous to that. And then the decree of the Council of Trent was that an ordinand must be at least 24 years old. So according to this decree, Vincent was not canonically eligible for ordination. The justification? The prescriptions of the Council of Trent were not yet in effect in France at that time. The decrees were supposed to be promulgated in France only in 1613. Yet we can say that his ordination was somehow irregular for the simple reason that he was still underage. And maybe this is the reason why Vincent went to a distant diocese, Perigueux, and sought out an old bishop who probably could not read anymore the documents. He was almost blind, to ordain him. So, Saint Vincent was madiskarte si Saint Vincent de Paul at that time in his life. He was not a saint. And he was in a hurry to be ordained a priest, not because he wanted to serve God, but because he wanted to ensure a life of comfort upon his retirement. Gusto niyang kumita kaagad. So that was a controversy and a failure on the part of Saint Vincent de Paul. Ngayon, at the time of Vincent's ordination, as I have said, he was far from being a saint. But he was a man in a hurry to get ordained in order to avail of the material benefits of the priesthood, to ensure for himself and his family a good fortune, and to secure for himself a respectable position in society. And this disposition was not any source of worry for Vincent. That was like the way of life at the time. Everybody did it. And this particular abuse was so rampant that neither the ordaining bishop or the ordinand cared for or would be ashamed of. When St. Vincent was asked later on for references and endorsements from the Bishop of Dax, ito pa, he described himself as an honest man ever since. And yet he knew very well that he was not as honest as he should have been. Let me leave you with some guides for reflection. Excuse me. What thoughts and feelings do you have about St. Vincent's ambitions? Baka mag-resonate ito para sa atin. Marami rin tayong mga ambition sa buhay. And what are your ambitions? And are you still driven by them up to now? Okay. Our next is the desire to become a priest. At the age of 70, when Vincent de Paul was already advanced in age and wisdom and holiness, he enumerated 3 elements that must accompany, and I tell this to our seminarians, one's desire to become a priest. 1, he must have a real calling from God. 2, he must have a pure intention of honoring God. And 3, he must have an adequate pastoral preparation. In his simple and humble analysis of himself, he was already 70 years old at that time, Vincent thought that he failed in all 3 counts, that he was too rash and too self-willed. He made his own decisions without trying to discover the will of God. And he was influenced by a worldly outlook and a materialistic view of the priesthood. Let me leave you with guide for reflection. What do you say of people who had become priests or religious for the wrong reasons and motives? And maybe some question, do you pray for your priests? Maybe this is also an appeal to you to pray for us, for priests. The 6th point here is empty promises. You know, as a young priest, Vincent would not stop pursuing his ambitions or his goals. He was always running after money. He went back to Rome and befriended a certain Monsignor Montorio, who promised him a real good benefice in France. Vincent, who was so ambitious, fell for this promise and even made a fool of himself, playing like a clown or a magician every time this Monsignor had guests in his house. Vincent was called to do some acts like a clown or a magician. After some time, Vincent realized that the promise of a good benefice would never materialize. Later on in life, he acknowledged this in his letter to his mother, something like expressing his regrets that he could not help his brother send his son to school because of the misfortunes that befell him, because he had not received any benefits at all. Again, let me leave you with guide for reflection. How far would you make a fool of yourself just to realize your ambitions? Many people are like that. Have you ever made promises that you were not able to fulfill or were not willing to fulfill? Number 7, and this one is something that is really good to think about. You know, Saint Vincent, as I have said, was not a saint at the time of his early life, up to about the age of 37. So when he was a young priest, after finishing his studies in Toulouse, where he got a degree in theology, he went about considering higher ambitions, one of which was becoming a bishop. He did have that ambition. And when Vincent was more mature later on in life, he talked about this. Sabi niya, this was a rashness of which I dare not speak about. Ayoko nang banggitin pa ulit ito kanino man. I'm so ashamed of this, that I have expressed a desire to become a bishop. In the meantime, Vincent continued to aspire for parishes that will provide for him better benefits and secure for him a high position in the church and then a comfortable retirement. For St. Vincent, parang it was like an obsession, and he was unstoppable in this ambition. but it was only God who inspired him through events that would change him and his life and his direction in life. Again, let me leave you with guide for reflection. How do you feel about Vincent's worldly ambitions? What would you consider this attitude of self-advancement normal at that time? Today? Then there was this Turkish captivity, another episode in Vincent's life, what is controversial narration of his Turkish captivity. Was this just an imaginary event that happened to him, or did it really happen to him? Up to now, this is a source of controversy and a source of debate among us conferers. Although many authors are still in a debate as to whether this truly happened or not, we see this episode as reflective of Vincent's desire for money, his undue and opportunistic use of his charisma, because St. Vincent was a charismatic person. Otherwise, why would 280 ladies go and stalk him wherever he went? He was very charismatic. And even nobility, women nobility were always after him. And even Madame de Gondi, who was married, she wanted a piece of St. Vincent de Paul. He was very charismatic. And he had this undue and opportunistic use of his charisma, his unscrupulous taking of other people's money without their permission and using it for his own purposes. His empty promises to pay off his creditors. Nangangako siya parati, babayaran kita, babayaran kita. Pero hindi naman siya nakakabayad. But anyway, in this Turkish captivity, Vincent wrote about it, and he talked about it, how he was captured by pirates, sold like a horse in the open market, pinapabukas sa kanila ang kanilang mga bibig para bilangin kung ilan ang ngipin nila. Okay? Kasi the number of teeth is equivalent to whether this person is healthy or not. So they were made to open their mouths, count their teeth, and in a period of 2 years, he has had 3 masters: a farmer, an alchemist, and a renegade who had 3 wives, one of whom took a fancy on him. Ganun charismatic si Vincent de Paul. And one of the wives was instrumental in the conversion of the Muslim renegade and in their escape to the free world. Now, after this narration by Vincent in a letter, sinulat niya ito in the early part of his life as a priest. Then he did never talk about it anymore. When in later years, matanda na si St. Vincent, that same letter was discovered and he was told about it. He panicked. He practically begged the discoverer to either destroy it or to send it back to him. He never got it back, but somehow his secretary, Brother Ducournau, got hold of it and kept it. And that is how we have this story of his captivity, which remains to be a big topic and a very controversial one. So we do not know kung St. Vincent ba ay parang product of his imagination lang itong sinulat niya o talaga bang naranasan niya itong captivity by the Turks. We do not know. Another controversy. Let me leave you with a guide for reflection. Have you ever been involved in controversies or intrigues? What did you do? Continue with them? Stop them? Ignore them? Correct them? What did you do with these controversies or intrigues? There was a time when Saint Vincent was accused of stealing. In Paris, Vincent had a misfortune which was a cause of shame for him, as he was accused of stealing money from his roommate, who was a judge in the court. Later on, we learned that this was a false accusation because the real culprit, after 6 years, when caught by the authorities for another crime, confessed also that he has stolen the money from Vincent's room, which was the money that actually belonged to the judge. During these 6 years that he was under cloud of stealing, Saint Vincent lived with this accusation, but he never defended himself. Nag-uumpisa na magbago ang buhay ni Saint Vincent de Paul. And in spite of this, Queen Margaret had commissioned Saint Vincent to distribute her alms to the poor. And he was also given an amount, 15,000 livres. 1 livre is equivalent to about 60 euros this our time, to be distributed to the poor. And Saint Vincent immediately did not keep that money. Like I said, he's starting to change already his way of life and his outlook in life. But he donated this money to the Hospital of Charity. And Saint Vincent learned a very good lesson from this episode in his life. He said, "You must suffer patiently and live to God to reveal the secrets of men's consciences. Raise your heart to God in moments like this and hope in God." Let me leave you with guide for reflection. Have you ever been accused of stealing? What and how does it feel to be accused of something that you did not do? Okay, then we have a project which is called the Salpêtrière. This was a project that was supposed to help the beggars of Paris. The Salpêtrière was a property given by the Queen to Saint Vincent, for the purpose of housing the beggars. More than 50,000 of them in Paris alone at any given time. 50,000 beggars. That is how hard life was during the time of Saint Vincent in France. The Ladies of Charity have already contributed a lot of money for this project, and so did many others, friends, nobilities, VIPs, and so many others. But Vincent delayed in realizing this project because he was not sure whether the project was really to take care of the poor, beggars, or just to get rid of them, because they were a source of embarrassment and shame for the society, as well as a cause of fear and threats for the people. Even now, sometimes many of us, we look upon beggars as a cause of embarrassment and or fear even, or a threat to us. But this project was also meant to contain the beggars in a single place so that they will not be all spread around the whole of Paris. And if they were not in that place, they would be imprisoned. And not only that, the poor peasants coming from the villages, from the provinces, should not be accepted into this, but force them to go back to their own villages. So in the mind of Saint Vincent, this was unacceptable. And Saint Vincent said it was not a sin to be poor, nor must the poor be punished for just being poor. So he delayed this project. And what happened? Vincent was roundly criticized for delaying this project. And then eventually, it was transferred to the care of another group. And the project was eventually stopped. Many Ladies of Charity criticized Saint Vincent for this and showed their utter disappointment and frustration, even to the point of boycotting Saint Vincent. And someone told Saint Vincent that many poor people were angry at him, that they were blaming him for having deprived the poor of a great assistance meant for them by the government. But again, Vincent did not defend himself. Instead, he told one of the ladies of charity, he says, and this was product of his reflection, the affairs of the Lord ordinarily develop little by little. They begin slowly and only then develop. And then he gave an example. When God sent His Son to redeem mankind, hindi ba nagtagal ng 4,000 years? Because God is never rushed and He does all things in His own good time. Beautiful reflection. Very well explained by St. Vincent. But the impression has been made in such a way that Vincent, the father of the poor, has been accused of being the oppressor of the poor. But Vincent did not defend himself. Instead, in his humble and simple way, he said, I will pray for them. So, makikita natin na unti-unti nang nagbabago ang takbo ng buhay ni St. Vincent de Paul. I leave you with a guide for reflection. Have you ever been misunderstood in your life? What was your defense? And then what is your idea of trust in divine providence? Which is a great legacy of St. Vincent de Paul to all of us Vincentians. 11 is the Orsini farm. A farm in Orsini in France was donated to Vincent by a pious couple. For as long as the couple were alive, there was no problem. Vincent developed the farm and he planted fruit trees, vegetables, and he even built a little house for the conference who might want to go there for relaxation or for quiet or for reflection. But when the couple died, the heirs of the couple wanted the farm back. Vincent refused to give the farm up. So nagkademandahan sila. Vincent fought hard to retain the farm, but he lost. And he had to give up the farm that he had developed already and put a lot of money on. He had to give it away because he lost the case. And then, as I have said, Vincent is changing his mindset now. After a while, he learned some valuable lessons from this experience. And he said, well, conference, we have gained much from this loss because God has taken away from us not just the property, but the satisfaction we took in owning it and the pleasure we would have in going there from time to time. And since there is now a greater possibility that we could lack material goods, His divine goodness wishes to draw us to have greater confidence in His providence and abandon to His care all of our anxieties. And then another lesson that St. Vincent has learned from this experience is never to go to court, no matter how much you think you may be in the right. Gastos lang yan na pagsisisihan mo rin later on. I leave you with a guide for reflection. Have you ever been engaged in a lawsuit? How was the experience? How does it feel to lose when you had thought that your case was a winner? Vincent thought that he would win the case, but he lost. How do you feel about that if it happens to you? Then another controversy was the question of whether to buy an abbey or not, a monastery or not. Another setback happened to St. Vincent when he agreed to buy the monastery of St. Laurent de Chaume, together with its titles, revenues, and responsibilities. And he had to pay a good amount of money for this for this purchase. But then he found out later on that actually the church was in ruins. There were no monks living there, and that the lands had been neglected for so long a time that he needed more money to develop them. Then again, nagkadimandahan na naman. And Vincent could not produce the money needed, 3,500 livres, that he was expected to pay annually. Taon-taon magbabayad siya. So after 6 years, Vincent had to finally give up this acquisition. He gave it up to somebody else who was interested in it. Guide for reflection. If you are engaged in business, what are the heartaches that you go through? Have you ever gone through some business losses? How did it feel? 13, Cardinal Mazarin. At the heart of the War of the Fronde, when peasants were fighting against peasants, peasants against the royalty, peasants against the nobility against each other, like there was chaos. Vincent, fired up by his concern, kasi sabi niya, ang tinatamaan talaga dito sa mga fights nito ay yung mga mahihirap. So he felt so bad about this situation that was going on for years, victims of the war. So he decided to go to the Prime Minister, Cardinal Mazarin, the Prime Minister of France. He talked to him about the steps that he had to make in order to stop the hostilities. Well, Mazarin just listened to him, but walang ginawa. The Prime Minister gave the impression to Vincent de Paul that he did not care much about Vincent's concerns or Vincent's suggestions. Both, by the way, both Cardinal Mazarin and Saint Vincent, they both loved France, but each in his own way. Cardinal Mazarin was a politician. Vincent de Paul was a spiritual person. So while they both loved France, they had different ways of looking at France. So in his whatever you call it, anger or exasperation, Vincent remembered the story of Jonah in the Old Testament, who threw himself into the sea to calm down the waters during a storm. So Vincent told the cardinal, go, throw yourself into the sea. Baka magkaroon pa ng kapayapaan pag tinapon mo ang sarili mo sa dagat. Meaning, resign. Your policies on this war make it more difficult for everyone, especially the poor, to live. Pero hindi naman nag-resign si Mazarin. The war went on. Then, later on, a week later probably, Vincent, upon reflection, blamed himself for the non-action or inaction. Wala naman nangyari doon sa kanyang confrontation with Cardinal Mazarin. He blamed himself and he reflected on this mistake. He told his secretary, Brother Ducournau, I have never found harsh words to do any good. If you want to change people's hearts, you have to be very careful not to hurt their feelings. And also he told his sidekick, Father Fortay, about this encounter with Cardinal Mazarin. He said, I went to his office to perform some small service for God, but because of my sins, nothing happened. I am really unworthy of anything. The humility of Saint Vincent de Paul is starting to come out already. I leave you with a guide for reflection. Is politics for you? Yes or no? Why? Would you ever join a protest, march, or demonstration against the government? Okay. Now, the 14th is this controversy about Jansenism, the abbot of Saint Cyran. One of the heresies that polarized, talagang dinivide yung simbahan sa France. Katulad nung panahon na divided yung Philippine Church between the Catholics and the Aglipais. Something like that happened, but worse. And this heresy was called Jansenism. It simply taught that the church was already irrelevant in the lives of the people. And because it was irrelevant, it had to be destroyed so that it will come out to become the real church founded by Jesus. And the Jansenists went as far as to believe that man was beyond redemption. Hindi na pwedeng iligtas pa ang sangkatauhan. Saint Vincent de Paul came into this. He was very much involved in fighting this heresy. But at the end of his life, Vincent was still suspected as friend of the Jansenists, even if the Jansenists themselves had never considered Vincent as their friend. Some have even called him a traitor against the abbot of Saint Cyran. Now, who was the abbot of Saint Cyran? Actually, his real name is Jean de Verger de Horan. Jean de Verger de Horan. They had become good friends. This idea of your friend is my friend is the friend of my friend was prevalent at the time. So Jean de Verger de Horan and Vincent had become friends because of these dynamics. And the two were so close together, parang soulmate. They had become friends and they had frequent meals together. They visited each other regularly. They had great admiration for each other. Vincent admired John's discourses and consulted him on many important issues. On the other hand, John was deeply impressed by Vincent's willingness to help and the services that he had received from him. Such was their mutual admiration. They even had what we would call today joint bank account. Silang dalawa. Nagkaroon sila ng joint bank account. In 1620, in Poitiers, France, de Verger was granted the abbey or monastery of Saint Cyran, and that is where he had taken his name, where he has taken his name from. So Jean de Verger de Horan and the abbot of Saint Cyran are one and the same person. Okay. Previous to their friendship, de Verger had become a good friend with a young man with a great love for work and penetrating mind. The name of that man was Cornelius Jansen. He was the first propagator of the heresy that was named after him, that is called Jansenism. Jansen had faced head-on popular issues at the time, such as original sin, grace, predestination, etc. And Jansen died on May 6, 1638. The abbot of Saint Cyran died October 11, 1643. But in spite of the differences between Saint Vincent and the abbot of Saint Cyran, the two remained good friends. But things got sour, especially when the abbot was imprisoned for his heresies. Because at the time, the government and the church were actually one. So the sin of a person was a crime to be punishable with imprisonment. So the abbot of Saint Cyran was put in prison. And when he was in prison, he started to malign and to say so many bad things about Saint Vincent de Paul, including that his humility was false. That Saint Vincent, maarte lang ito si San Vicente, ito si Vicente de Paul, maarte lang ito. Wala naman talagang katotohanan ng kanyang mga sinasabi. And their differences centered on the following issues. Una, the Jansenists believe that God has already destroyed the church in the last 500 or 600 years. So wala na tayong magagawa. That the Council of Trent had changed every Catholic doctrine and was not a lawful council, according to Jansenists. Of course, St. Vincent fought all of this. that vows interfere with perfection, that we don't need vows to be perfect. They are actually an obstacle. That the Pope and the majority of bishops do not constitute the true church. That the just should have no other law than the interior movement of grace. And one that was very important was the fight over forgiveness of sins. You know, for the Jansenists, if you go to confession, the Jansenist priest will not give you absolution. He will tell you, you do this and you do this and you do that, and then come back after 1 month. I will give you the absolution. But then after 1 month, this man has committed so many other sins that when he goes to confession again after 1 month, hindi pa rin sa kanya may bibigay yung absolution kasi may panibago siyang kasalanan. So St. Vincent de Paul did not like that. He fought against that. He said that is not true. God's mercy is boundless. God forgives us. No matter how big, how many sins we commit, God forgives. So diyan nagkakabanggaan ni si Abbot of Saint Cyran and St. Vincent de Paul. Guide for reflection. What do you do when the friendship goes sour? And what is your image of the Catholic Church today? And then, lastly, we have this to set the captives free. And this is one of the most controversial issues in the life of St. Vincent de Paul. Towards the end of his life, Vincent had made a plan to set free the captives in Algiers, French captives, as well as some of our converts. So he made a contract with a captain, Mr. Paul, who had established a name for himself as a warrior liberator, a mercenary. He owned several ships and mercenary sailors. He offered to lead an armed expedition to liberate the French prisoners in Algiers. In Vincent's mind, this was the only way to end the African nightmare once and for all. And then the Ladies of Charity had already contributed a large sum of money for this purpose, as well as many others of the French society, even the government. An initial payment of 20,000 livres was deposited for this purpose. But then after that, nothing was heard of this project. On September 17, 10 days before his death, that should be September 10, September 17. On September 17, 1660, 10 days before his death, St. Vincent had written about this project, expressing his anxiety over it. He said, I feel very deeply about what is happening to our brothers in Algiers. What an anxiety it is. How much uncertainty there is in the present circumstances. God protect them. My concern is causing me indescribable anguish. The rumor is going around here that Commander Paul had already laid siege on Algiers, but we do not know how that has turned out. Tell me that ships are beginning to set sail for Algiers, but you make no mention of our poor brothers. In God's name, please let me know. Tell me what is going on. Tell me what is happening. So this was the last project of Vincent de Paul. And he never knew the outcome of this project because he died 10 days later, September 27. His plan was to rescue thousands of French captives, including some converts, from the hands of the Turks in Algiers. We can say that the expedition ended in failure. Commander Paul, armed with the king's secret orders and the approval of Cardinal Mazarin, did set sail for Algiers with his troops, but part of the contract was for the money to be set aside and given only as full payment if the adventure had succeeded. If the plan had failed, the same amount should be used to ransom the captives through other means. So, one misfortune after another happened. The ships were prevented from sailing due to a series of unforeseen events, typhoons, big waves, strong winds. The city of Marseille was responsible for maintaining the ships during the whole time that the ships were docked at the port, but the ships could not leave the port. As Commander Paul was nearing the coast of Algiers, adverse wind delayed him for several days. The possibility of rescuing all the prisoners had become less and less remote. Then, well, there were some 40 prisoners able to swim towards the ship, but only 3 were rescued. It was a complete disaster, complete failure. And St. Vincent de Paul was part of this. The question is, why did St. Vincent embark on this kind of plan? Siya pa naman was called a man of peace, a gentle human being. Why did he involve himself in this plan? Well, probably he had hoped that this plan would end the troubles for the French captives and for the conference, especially for Brother Barreau, because the Turks weren't open to negotiation or to payment. Or perhaps St. Vincent was hit by that romantic notion about ending his life, liberating the captives, in the same way that many years ago, after having been a captive himself, he too would be free to embark on a new life that opened to him many possibilities, especially in the area of service of the poor and the reform of the clergy. We can only speculate. So these controversies, setbacks, and failures may seem to have made Vincent the wrong person at the wrong time and at the wrong place. But our saint was always ready to say sorry and deeply mean it and to change his mind if he had to. Every time St. Vincent was driven by charity to fraternally correct a confer, he made it into a habit to first ask that confer to forgive him for the same faults. This humble disposition of Vincent is really what mattered most. Ito mas mahalaga. The setbacks, the controversies, the failures, they were there. But what is important is how did Vincent de Paul handle all of these controversies and setbacks and failures? St. Vincent knew he was in need of God's mercy, and he begged for it. St. Vincent knew that he was a wretched instrument in the hands of God, and he prayed for God's grace. And all the while, he never stopped loving and serving the poor with the strength of his arm and the sweat of his brow. And this was the way, Vincent's way, of turning controversies into opportunities, of learning valuable lessons from the many setbacks that he had experienced. And this was his way of converting failures into successes. St. Paul has said that where sin abounds, God's grace abounds even more. And this is the truth that we celebrate. St. Vincent de Paul was a great sinner, but by God's grace, he is now a great saint. So the controversies, the setbacks, and the failures are not meant to put St. Vincent down, but to help us understand that we too go through all of this every day of our lives. And the question is, how do we handle this to benefit our souls, to benefit our relationships, to improve our relationship, most especially with God? And in this, St. Vincent de Paul was a resounding success. Now, thank you for your attention. God bless. I will end there.
Thank you, Father Peralta, for sharing with us a glimpse of the life of St. Vincent de Paul and lessons we all can gain from how he lived his life. He was clearly ready to help the poor and the disadvantaged, and but met controversies, failures, and setbacks like all of us. He focused on Christ. His philosophy is something for us to remember. If you like to live like Jesus Christ, you must die like Jesus Christ. And if you want to die like Jesus Christ, you must live like Jesus Christ. Thank you all.
Thank you.
We're now ready for the closing song.
Maraming salamat, Father Perry.
Welcome.
Thank you po.
Welcome. Thank you very much for inviting me. Okay. It was a joy preparing this.
Yes, it's also a good timing for me. Fiesta.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you po, Ivan.
Thank you. Okay.
Quickly, the next prayer gathering online will be on October 5, Saturday. Our main sharer will be Paddy Padilla, while our next recollection is on October 19, Saturday. The recollection will be facilitated by Father Rex Fortes, CM. So again, thank you and good evening.
Okay. Thank you for repeating it. Salamat. Thank you, everyone. Salamat din.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Okay.
Have a nice-
Thank you.
Bye
Bye-bye.
po.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Father.
Welcome. Happy Feast Day.